So you have a little extra cash laying around and you want to spend it on a new lens. Well, I have two questions for you. Are you a mid-range shooter who likes to get up close and personal? Or do you like to shoot your targets from a distance? First, we're talking about the Lumix 25mm. Focal length is equivalent to a 50mm. Then we have the 35 to 100mm, and its focal length is equivalent to a 70 to 200. Either way, I got you covered. Welcome to the GH series. While I'm not a minimalist, I do have a minimalistic mentality when it comes to a lot of my filming practices. For example, my philosophy when it comes to film gear is try not to buy more than you need and try to master all of the gear that you have. So when my wife and I film a wedding, we only use these 4 lenses for the whole wedding day. When I film a promo video for a small business, I typically use these 2 lenses. And for corporate events, I use these 3 lenses. So today we are going to be talking about 2 lenses that we film more projects with than any other lens on the GH5 other than the Sigma 60mm f1.4. Let's start things off with the Lumix 25mm. Look how tiny this lens is. It's so cute. You can easily fit it in your pants pocket, shirt pocket, hot pocket. Well, you probably wouldn't want to, never mind. This is hands down one of the best lenses to use on your GH5 when you're traveling because it's so compact. You can purchase it new on Amazon around $250 and you can snatch this little guy up for around $130 used. The funny thing is, back in March 2018, I originally bought this lens brand spanking new off of Amazon for $147. So that price has actually gone up by $100 in the past 2 years. Even though this lens is made out of plastic, it still feels really nice in your hands. It's super small. It almost resembles a toy. As I mentioned in my previous video, my wife and I really don't use autofocus, so manually focusing on this lens is really nice and smooth. On the GH5, this is equivalent to a 50mm, which I found is a great focal length for a lot of our handheld shots. My wife uses this lens for all of the groom's prep shots when we are filming weddings, and she does it all handheld. This glass is sharp enough to cut you. Well, the image is sharp all the way to the corners, and for my Instagram teasers, I often zoom in by 200%, and I'm very pleased how the image holds up when using this lens. When we are filming cocktail hour, we typically film with this lens handheld, and because the GH5 and this lens are so small, the guests tend to continue to act natural, and most of the time, they don't even notice us, or they think we're photographers. So here's a corporate event that I recently filmed solo. I used the Sigma 16mm for the wider shots, and I used the 25mm for the close-up detail shots. I typically film all of my detail shots with this lens around f2.2 to f2.8. I like to give a shout out to Caleb Hoover, who also wants to share his favorite GH5 lens with you. If you're into the GH5, you probably come across Caleb's channel, as he has a full lineup of great GH5 videos filled with a plethora of info on the GH5. Here's a little sneak peek at one of his favorite lenses for the GH5. I'll have a link to his video in the description below.
Hey, what's up everyone? In this video, I'm going to be talking about my love-hate relationship with the Lumix 12 to 35mm f2.8 Mark II for the Panasonic GH5. Is it the best lens for video on the GH5?
The Lumix 35 to 100mm is another lens that we use for every single event. It is also currently the most expensive lens I own for the GH5, with a price tag on Amazon around $1,000 if you buy it brand new. Focal length wise, the 35 to 100mm on the GH5 is equivalent to a 70 to 200. I filmed on Canon cameras for years, so in my hands, this lens does not feel like the typical 70-200 that I'm used to. That is one reason I love shooting on GH5s, because the lenses are so easy to carry around. You can get a really good idea of how compact the 35 to 100 is when we look at it next to the Sigma 18 to 35, with the Sigma 18 to 35 also being much heavier than the 35 to 100mm. This is a well-built lens, and for $1,000 it should be. It sports a metal body, so it feels really high quality in your hands. I've used this lens all over the world, but with all the places I've been to with this lens, it has held up perfectly and still looks great. The zoom and focus are just as smooth as the 25mm, if not better, and it has an internal zoom, which I prefer on zoom lenses. What this means is that the lens does not extend when you zoom in and out. One of the most impressive features before we get to the image quality of this lens is its image stabilization. So when used on my GH5S, which does not have IBIS, I now have stabilized handheld shots. This is actually version 2 of the lens, so when paired with the GH5, you get dual image stabilization. With that said, my typical use for the 35-100 is for close-up shots. So I will of course use this for wedding ceremonies, and it is my go-to lens for close-up shots of the bride. For corporate events, I use it for anyone who is giving a presentation. Something I haven't mentioned yet is that this lens has a constant aperture of 2.8. So this is very helpful when filming indoors with this lens. When I do film inside, I am filming usually at 24 frames per second, and I usually use 2 or more LEDs to add some additional light. Most of the time at corporate events, they will have professional lighting, so at least 1 or 2 spotlights and we are good. I've said this in other videos, but the GH5 is not a camera I would rely on if I need autofocus. But I would say, of all the micro four thirds lenses that I've owned, this lens is the best when it comes to autofocus, especially in low light situations. And if you're going to be doing some autofocus, this lens is the quietest lens I've ever owned. The Lumix 25mm is a super sharp lens at f2.0 or higher, and the 35-100 is even sharper, and at 5 times more the price it should be. But these lenses are not competing, as you will have different uses for both. And so if you are in the market for a new lens and have a few extra pennies in your piggy bank, I would highly recommend both lenses. GH over everything.